Hey everybody, Jesse here again with Daventry Studios and another episode of Bring On the Bad Guys, where we take a look at some of the biggest and baddest Marvel villains through the years. Today we're looking at villains from Doctor Strange's Rogues Gallery in the 60s. So in order to qualify for this list, a villain had to first appear against Doctor Strange in either Strange Tales. I have a copy of Strange Tales back there. That is the first magazine that Doctor Strange appeared in. Not this particular issue, but that series. And his own self-titled Doctor Strange comic series is the other series that one of these villains has to appear in to qualify. I have some special guest Funko Pops today as well. We have a couple villains there in the middle that we're going to meet, and of course Doctor Strange and the Ancient One on the ends. I also have my Eye of Agamotto pendant for this special occasion. So, without further ado, we are going to take a look at these villains. So, here we go. Number 10, Asmodeus. His real name is Dr. Charles Benton. His first appearance was in Doctor Strange 169 from 1968. He was born in New York City, New York, and created by Roy Thomas and Dan Adkins. His power scale, again, quick review over the power scale. 5 categories. You can get up to 5 points in each of those categories for a total of 25. Personality, powers, and design are self-explanatory. Mythology, that's any story that takes place in the pages of the comics. Cultural impact, that is their influence off the pages of the comic books. So movies, video games, slam poetry. I don't think there are currently any slam poems about any of these characters, but if there are, we will be sure to include that. So number 10, we have Asmodeus, as I said, and he is also a medical doctor, and he worked a bit with Doctor Strange when the hero was a doctor himself. And Asmodeus, as Charles Benton, before going bad, often collected donations and solicited pro bono. I think you even call pro bono work that for doctors, but Doctor Strange always declined because he wouldn't do anything without getting paid. So the two basically swapped courses, and Asmodeus headed down towards the evil route where Doctor Strange had a life-changing experience in his car crash and became the superhero we all know. Asmodeus, instead of staying on the straight and narrow, decided he would get involved with a group called the Sons of Satanish, and we're going to learn about someone else related to that group a little later on. But Asmodeus and a bunch of his own co-followers managed to form a rift in the time-space dimension continuum. Try saying that 5 times fast. And they were able to bring out both Ymir, the frost giant, and Surtur, the fire giant, into the main Marvel world for the first time. Of course, Thor was familiar with these figures, but it took the Avengers and Doctor Strange working together to bring them down. The act of summoning those two monsters was too much for Benton's heart, and he had a heart attack, passed away. Of course, comic book characters don't stay dead. He showed up later. This picture here is from the pages of the more recent Old Man Logan comics. So that is Asmodeus, heading towards number 9. So there's some pretty ugly creatures on this list, but Zom might be the ugliest Marvel character, whether it be hero or villain, that I've ever seen for sure. So I can't imagine that I would be able to find someone that looks a lot uglier than Zom. So Zom appeared in Strange Tales 156. No one really knows his origin. He was created by Stan Lee and Marie Severin. His power scale, personality 1, he's not a very smart individual, but he is very powerful. So his power ranking is 5. And we're going to see a lot of very powerful entities on this list, and that might give you an idea of how powerful Doctor Strange actually is. His mythology is 3. He doesn't have a lot of amazing stories set after his first run where he is brought to fight against Umar, who we will learn about later as well. Design 1, as I said, very, very ugly. And cultural impact, he's never appeared off the pages of the comics, so nothing there. So he gets a 1 for a total of 11. So Zom is a being of almost unspeakable power, as very powerful beings are wont to be described in comic books. He was released from his prison, which included those metal shackles that were around his hands that you see in the picture there. And he was released in order to defeat Umar, who is Dormammu's sister, and if you don't know those names, you will by the end of this list. And it was one of those occasions where the hero released an even more powerful villain than the threat they were facing, and then hoped to take down the even more powerful threat, which is fortunately what Doctor Strange was able to do. Zom has also fought against the Hulk and some other heavy hitters in the Marvel Universe. His weakness, if you can imagine, is that forelock of hair on top of the ugly mask that he calls his head. So if you manage to cut that hair, he's going to go down in his power. And that's some pretty ugly hair. So good luck as far as that goes. Number 8, Mr. Yandroth. And as I was going through these pictures here, I noticed a lot of green. So there's a lot of kind of unusual things about this edition. A lot of green energy, green characters, a lot of super powerful characters, and a lot of entities from across the multiverse that exists in the Marvel Universe. Universes, multiverses, etc. So Yandroth is essentially the science equivalent of Doctor Strange. So Doctor Strange is the Sorcerer Supreme. Yandroth is a scientist supreme from the planet Yan. And he, of course, wanting to prove that science is greater than magic, attracted Doctor Strange to him in an off-world dimension, and the two had some very significant battles, which ended up in Yandroth being dropped in a almost never-ending time-space warp. So if you've seen Thor Ragnarok and you see what Doctor Strange does to Loki temporarily in that movie, that's what Doctor Strange ends up doing to Yandroth, is dropping him in one of those, and Yandroth would escape later on to face the Defenders, which is Doctor Strange's first superhero team with the Hulk, Namor, and the Silver Surfer. And Yandroth remained a primary foe of the Defenders as well as Doctor Strange throughout the years. And Yandroth is his real name. His first appearance was in Strange Tales 164. He was created by Dan Adkins and Jim Lawrence. His personality is a 2. He's really a little full of himself, and by a little I mean a lot. He also does not have great teeth, as you can tell by that picture. And very smart, very conniving villain, but very prideful as well. So he leaves himself open to a lot of Doctor Strange's solutions to his maniacalness. Powers 3, he is very adept at inventing, very adept at almost any science you can imagine, except political science, which isn't the same, and I can say that because that's what I studied in school. And his mythology is a 3, pretty average. One of those lesser-known villains that shows up can usually give the heroes a run for their money. Design 3, nothing great. In this picture, he looks a little like the Wizard of Oz as he appears to Doctor Strange. He's not the Wizard of Oz, unfortunately, and his design is a 3, so average. Cultural impact 1, he has not appeared off the pages of the comics, so he gets a total of 12 points, which, of course, land him at number 8. Moving to number 7, we have someone you finally might be familiar with, and it's Silius. And this is another very interesting character because, as you might know, Silius was the primary villain in the Doctor Strange movie. Before the Doctor Strange movie, Silius is almost a non-entity in the comics. He appears in, well, his first appearance is Strange Tales 130, so he appears there, and in a few issues after that, working for Baron Mordo, has very few spoken lines, is really not that powerful. He's one of 3 of Mordo's minions who he continually sends out to try to track down Doctor Strange or the Ancient One or steal something that Mordo needs for his next scheme. So he's a very, 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 very minor character. And he was chosen by those that have the power at Marvel Studios to be the primary villain. And you have to think that that's because they didn't want to waste one of Doctor Strange's more powerful foes. And we do, of course, see Dormammu at the end of that movie, so we see who is actually driving Silius. This picture here of Silius is actually from the more recent Valkyrie comics, where Jane Foster is a Valkyrie. And he appears there in a similar way to how he looks in the movie, where he's played by Mads Mikkelsen. And Mads is one of my favorite actors, and he does a fantastic job in the movie as well. So Silius, no one even knows where he's from. That's how minor of a character he is. That hasn't really been fleshed out. He was created by Stan Lee and Steve Ditko. Again, just kind of a side minion. And Scott Derrickson and company picked his name out, maybe out of a hat. I doubt it, but he was the main villain in the movie, so his personality is a 3. He is decently smart for a minion type character, and his powers are also a 3. He is adept at the ways of sorcery, although not on the same level as someone like Baron Mordo or Doctor Strange. His mythology is a 1. Again, almost non-existent in the comics before the Doctor Strange movie came out. His design is a 2. It's a little better here in the picture that we see, again, the more modern picture. In the first, he has a very, very elementary outfit, a mustache and a cap type covering over his head, and that's it. Nothing special. He doesn't really do anything special in the comics, so his design gets him a 2. His cultural impact 4, and that is from, of course, the movie that we mentioned. He also shows up as a villain. Well, he did. I guess the game is now defunct, but the Marvel Heroes Online video game had Silius on a side mission as a boss character that came out in conjunction with the Doctor Strange film. So that's Silius. Very unusual case in Marvel lore. Very obscure villain that was chosen to be a primary villain, and still someone that not a lot of people have heard of if you haven't seen the movie. Moving to number 6, we've got more green energy and Kalu. He first appeared in Strange Tales 148 back in August 1966. He's from Kamartaj, Tibet, on the planet Earth, and while we are talking about the movie, of course, that is set partially in Kamartaj. He was created by Stan Lee, Danny O'Neill, and Bill Everett, and his power scale, personality 3. He is charismatic, although not quite on the same level as someone like the Ancient One. He actually had to use spells to convince a lot of his followers to follow him in his original days. Powers 4, he is a very, very powerful sorcerer. Almost at the same level as Doctor Strange, if not more powerful, depending on the story that we are talking about on any given day. Mythology 3, he has some interesting stories, nothing really that spectacular. Design 3, he has a kind of standard look for Marvel's magicians. And his cultural impact is a 1 because he has never appeared off the pages of the comics. And Kalu's story is that he started off almost as a partner in crime with the Ancient One, although it was not crime, but studying the mystic arts. And as often happens in stories like this, one of the two went on the good path, and that was the Ancient One. One of the two went on the bad path, and that was Kalu. And Kalu was basically mystically locked up by the Ancient One for hundreds of years, finally broke out, and caused a lot of trouble for Doctor Strange. And Umar actually had to help contain Kalu. And then, of course, Umar herself had to be contained by Zom, so it was this whole domino effect of some of these villains in the 60s. But it's also a very interesting storyline because they do roll into each other, and it's this interesting battle of powers from space and time and dimensions, and they all kind of rumble into each other and roll on throughout the series. Kalu also actually was a member of the Avengers a little later on, not the main team, but he does have a little bit of a change of heart, so he uses his magic for good later on. But very powerful. One quick note about his first appearance. His eyes appear before Strange Tales 148, but if you look in 148, you can see that he's in his secret hideout, getting ingredients and materials ready to help in his fight against Doctor Strange and the Ancient One. In the previous issue, you see his eyes glaring at the Ancient One, and some people say, well, that's his first appearance, there's his eyes. It's pretty clear from Strange Tales 148 that that's probably a spell that Kalu is using. So Kalu isn't actually there. That's the scenario that makes sense when you compare the full story. So his first full appearance, Strange Tales 148. That's Kalu. And we move to number 5, another ugly green monster. This is Satanish. And we mentioned him a little briefly a little bit ago when we were talking about Asmodeus. And Satanish, which is also his real name, first appeared in Doctor Strange 174 in November of 1968. And we're not quite sure where he comes from, but the safe bet is the Dark Dimension, and that is where Dormammu lives. And we say that's a safe bet because Satanish is actually the son of Dormammu, or as much of a son as you can get when you're talking about interdimensional demons. He was created by Roy Thomas and gentleman Gene Colan. Personality 3, he is good at bending people to his will, but he's also very scary and can rely on his appearance in a lot of cases. Powers 5, very, 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 very powerful. And by most accounts, the only Marvel demon that is more powerful than Satanish is Mephisto. And we will get to Mephisto a little later on when we talk about the Silver Surfer and Ghost Rider and such in future decades. But Satanish, very, very extremely powerful. I don't think very extremely is the proper sentence, but he is extremely powerful. Mythology 3, he doesn't quite have the track record of his father Dormammu or Mephisto. And in fact, you probably have heard of him mostly because his name is used in a lot of Doctor Strange's incantations throughout the comics. Much like Dormammu was used before he appeared, Voltor, Sitarak, these really powerful mystical entities that are quoted by Doctor Strange frequently. Satanish is one of those. Design 2, just because the guy's just ugly, and he's got another face in his stomach. I can't really blame anyone for designing a demon that looked like that, because I have to imagine that's what an ugly demon would actually look like, but not pleasant to look at, so he gets a 2. Cultural impact 2, he hasn't really appeared out of the pages of the comics. In one of the Marvel vs. Capcom games, there's an ending where you can see Mephisto, and actually Satanish is on the same screen at the same time as Mephisto is. So very, very, very minor appearance out the pages of comics. So that's just barely enough to get his cultural impact up to a 2. That's number 5, Satanish. Gosh, he's got dirty fingernails too. Number 4, Umar, who again we have mentioned and heard about already. So Umar first appeared in Strange Tales 150 in November of 1966, and she is from the Faltine dimension, and the Faltine dimension is a dimension that is full of a lot of, you might call it living fire and very powerful entities. She and her brother, who we will talk about a little later, were kicked out of their dimension because they started getting involved in material things. So the Faltine dimension is all about the immaterial, fire, not concrete, like a body or atoms and things forming solids. You can tell I'm a very scientific person by that description, but Umar and Dormammu were dabbling in that sort of magic. So to compare it to something that you're probably more familiar with, there's countless stories of people, a lot of times kids, not real life stories, of course, but fictional stories, dabbling in spirits and stuff like that. And it's always a bad thing because the spirits are always bad. And that's how you have to get an exorcist involved and such. It's the opposite for Dormammu and Umar in that their dimension was mostly spirit and flame, and they wanted to dabble with the more material things. So that's why they were booted out. Umar has been more powerful than Dormammu at certain times, which means that she is incredibly, incredibly powerful. Personality is a 4. Some people have compared her to Cersei Lannister from Game of Thrones in that she is conniving, she is malicious, she's very tricky and very smart. So she's a very good planner, always a few steps ahead, and doesn't really care about people, just wants to get her way. Powers are 4, and if I had to clarify, I would put her powers at 4, but the very, 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 very top of 4. And the only reason why we put her at 4 is because she has a few limitations a lot of the times that her brother does not have, such as choosing to limit her power in favor of looking like a human, as opposed to Dormammu, who does not look like a human really at all. So her power is kind of capped a little bit. When it is not capped, she is definitely up in the 5s. Mythology is 3. Oftentimes, she will actually help Doctor Strange fight her brother. They don't get along very well. They're always fighting against each other to see who will be the ruler of the dark dimension. So she's not really on friendly terms with her brother. She will work with Dormammu if it suits her. She will work with Doctor Strange if it suits her, which is much less often. She was created by Roy Thomas and Bill Everett. I think I said that already. Moving on, power scale. Design 3 and cultural impact 2. So she hasn't shown up off the pages of the comics. However, we do get a glimpse of the dark dimension in Doctor Strange, and because Umar is so tied in with the dark dimension, we give her a 2 in that and not just a 1. Moving on to number 3, this is also someone that you've seen appear in the MCU. We have Baron Mordo, and his real name is Carl Mordo. He first appeared way back in Strange Tales 111 in 1963, making him the oldest villain on this list. He's from Transylvania, Romania, where a lot of bad guys and villains that related to magic came from. He was created by Stan Lee and Steve Ditko. Personality 3. So Mordo, very good planner, very powerful. Again, a lot of these people are really, I like the word conniving a lot because it describes these people very well. But he's also really limited by his desire for power, where he's willing to serve Dormammu and serve other powerful entities that help him gain more power. So he is a little one-dimensional in that search for power. His powers, as we're speaking of them, would definitely be at a 4. He's a very powerful sorcerer. Very close to Doctor Strange's level, but not quite there. Mythology 3. The really great Doctor Strange stories involve Nightmare, who's coming up, Dormammu, Umar, Shumagorath, who we will get into in the next segment of Doctor Strange villains. But Baron Mordo is still a solid presence in the stories. Design 3, nothing great, nothing awful, kind of middle of the road. Cultural impact 4, again, Baron Mordo, who's not called Baron in the movie, has shown up in the MCU. He's in the Doctor Strange film, played by Chiwetel Ejiofor, and the movie is a lot different from his actual origin in the comics. In the movie, spoiler alert if you haven't seen it, but it came out a few years ago, so you should have by now, Mordo is a very sympathetic character. He's basically the right-hand man of the Ancient One, helped train Doctor Strange, is one of Doctor Strange's closest friends, and then when he finds out towards the end of the movie that the Ancient One has been siphoning off power from the Dark Dimension, which is something that he's always been told not to do, then Mordo becomes disillusioned with the whole world of magic and leaves, and we see him in an after-credits scene taking away magic from other people that are using it on the Earth. So definitely setting the stage for him to be a villain in the future. In the comics, he is a villain pretty much right away. Doctor Strange shows up to get trained by the Ancient One and finds out almost immediately that Baron Mordo does not have good intentions for why he's studying magic. So Baron Mordo and Doctor Strange go way, way, way back, and they don't like each other, as you might imagine. He's also appeared in several animated shows and games. His most significant animated show appearance was in the Spider-Man animated series from the 90s. He appears in a really fun run of episodes where Mordo is working with Dormammu to try to get Dormammu through a doorway into our world. Carnage comes into the picture, Venom. It's a really fun story. So that's Baron Mordo. More green from our villains. Oh, and more green. Number 2, Nightmare. Nightmare is my, well, I was going to say personal favorite, but Dormammu is pretty awesome too, so it's kind of a tie. His real name is Nightmare, and his first appearance is in Strange Tales 110, which is also Doctor Strange's first appearance, so Nightmare is the first person to face Doctor Strange in the comics. He was, I don't know if born is the right word, his place of origin is the Everin dimension, and that is a dimension of dreams, subconscious, things like that. He was created by Stan Lee and Jack Kirby. Personality is a 4. He is a very adept schemer, almost on the same level as Loki. Powers 5, he runs his own dimension, as a lot of these Doctor Strange villains do. He runs the Nightmare dimension. He's the ruler over it. Mythology 3, a lot of great stories from Nightmare. Whenever he shows up in the 60s issues of Doctor Strange and early 70s, there's some really trippy, cool, bizarre art going on. And makes sense because Doctor Strange is usually being pulled into the Nightmare realm, and Nightmare is messing with his mind. So really fun, trippy art when Nightmare is involved, usually. His design is a 3. I can see, getting positive points for the skulls, but he's really had some issues looking, what's a good way to say this? His hair hasn't always looked as cool as it does in this particular picture. So that's Nightmare. Cultural impact 3. He was the first villain to face Doctor Strange, so that's significant. He is also highly rumored to appear in Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness, which is the next Doctor Strange film that will be released in the MCU. And he has shown up in various video games as well. That is Nightmare. Also, he has a really creepy nightmare, as in mare, horse. So he rides that around a lot, and very creepy looking. And number 1, There was never any doubt, was there? No, because we were talking about him this whole time almost as we were going through the villains. The dread Dormammu himself. He first appeared in Strange Tales 126 in November of 1964, and like his sister Umar, comes from the Faltine dimension. He was created by Stan Lee and Steve Ditko. And the interesting thing about Dormammu's creation is that we talked when we were discussing Satanish that when Doctor Strange is going through his spells or incantations, there are various mystical names that he mentions. So the Crimson Bands of Sidorak, for example, the Flames of the Faltine, which is where Dormammu comes from. And Dormammu was one of those names at the early career of Doctor Strange. So these incantations would be spoken by the Doctor, and Dormammu, his name would come up. And there wasn't really anything attached to that name. They were, Stan Lee and Steve Ditko were coming up with, names that sounded cool or mysterious or whatever. And Stan Lee said that people kept writing in asking who this Dormammu was. So then he had to actually make a character based off him. So he and Steve Ditko then created the character of Dormammu. And in one of Baron Mordo's first story arcs, Baron Mordo is working for Dormammu. And Dormammu, in classic comic book villain fashion, is disappointed by Mordo time and time again and keeps threatening to throw him in another dimension or kill him, and Mordo keeps failing and Dormammu keeps giving him more chances and finally gets tired of him. So they part ways. Mythology, we didn't do personality. Personality 4, powers 5, and those are kind of mixed together because part of Dormammu's personality is that he has the dark dimension at his command. So we saw Dormammu in Doctor Strange at the end, and he is almost always on some level one with the dark dimension where he rules. And that also, of course, impacts his personality because, as you saw in the movie, he has complete control over everything in the dimension. So he can conjure up whatever he wants out of the materials of the dimension to further his plans, further his plotting. Very powerful character. So, like I said, powers 5, personality 4. He's not wily as someone like Loki might be. He is very determined to take over dimensions one by one, and that is his motivation most of the time. So not a very complicated motivation. Mythology 4, again, some really great stories with Doctor Strange and the Avengers, and the early stories are actually very, very, very fun because you see the whole progression of Dormammu starting out as this name and then a character being invented, and then something as simple as the colors changing of the character, and Doctor Strange visiting the dark dimension for the first time, and all the trippy Ditko art that is so fun to immerse yourself in, and which goes right into design, which is a 5. And Dormammu has always been one of the coolest designed characters in the Marvel Universe. Head on fire, interdimensional fire, claws sometimes, rings, the crown that he wears around his head sometimes, which is a crown of flames. Really, really cool looking character. And cultural impact 4. He appears in a lot of animated shows, of course. He appears in Doctor Strange in the MCU. And there's a great Dormammu I've come to bargain scene with Doctor Strange, which is absolutely wonderful to watch. And I have a feeling we will be seeing Dormammu again because he is such a strong, powerful entity that I don't believe the MCU's intention was to leave him just for one movie. So he's still out there. There's going to be some way he figures out to get back at Doctor Strange. Maybe not in this next movie, but definitely sometime in the future. So that's Dormammu. And we'll run through these as a quick review. Asmodeus at 10. Zom the Ugly, as I like to call him, 9. Yandroth at 8. Silius at 7. Kalu at 6. Satanish at 5. Umar at 4. Baron Mordo at 3. Nightmare at 2. And the Dread Dormammu at number 1. So, next week, I believe we're finally going to get to Spider-Man. Do you like how all my bobbleheads fell over as I was talking about, I think it was Umar. That was the noise you heard, them falling over. So, perfect timing, of course. I hope to get to Spider-Man for the next episode. If not Spider-Man, then we'll probably do Thor, but I'm pretty sure we'll get to Spider-Man next time around. Make sure you like the video, subscribe, share us with all your friends, because our mission here is to bring stories to you, and that could be comics, that could be novels, that could be short stories, movies, whatever. We're all about bringing you stories that you can find and enjoy and really dive into and have fun with. So that's why we give these introductions and these little historical, pieces like Bring On the Bad Guys. And we're glad you're watching. We are glad to have you, and we will see you next time. Thanks for watching.